Hello, everyone. Welcome into Above My Pay Grade. My name is Eric. Today I have Luke from Market Mania, the macro extraordinaire. Luke, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi guys, thank you for having me on the channel here. I have a YouTube channel called Market Mania. I do many things, but basically macro is a passion of mine, so is psychology. I also trade and I'm active in financial markets. So yeah, that's kind of my little roundup there.
Yeah, so Luke, I love your channel. I will link it in the show notes, but I've been watching Luke's channel for a couple months now, and he mainly focuses on Canadian markets, but you do a very good job of breaking down the macro view and how it affects the micro view, which I think a lot of investors can kind of brush over that. But some of the main currents that are moving the economy today are fear. We have this massive bubble here in the United States. I'm sure I've watched your channel. I'm sure the bubble in real estate, in fact, in Canada, seems to be even bigger than the United States. But
Yeah.
since you focus on Canada, what's your what are you seeing as if you were to tell somebody who's never paid attention to the economy and say, "Hey, here's the problem. Here's how it's going to affect you. Here's the 10,000 foot view." What would you say to them?
Yeah, so basically the main problems I see moving forward, like many other countries, and you can kind of put Canada in the same category as countries like Australia and New Zealand. Very similar circumstances to each other with real estate and everything like that. But essentially, we've been in this artificial environment of low interest rates. And I'm not just talking about the period of 2020 and 2021. I'm talking you go way back to 2014, 2015 when they lowered rates. Rates have been way too low for so long. So people have kind of got used to these low rates and they bet on it. And it's not just your average Joe and Jane type people, it's corporations, it's pension funds have all kind of bet on interest rates being low for a long time. And now we've seen them shoot right back up again. So you've got all these corporations that have a ton of debt. Private debt is absolutely insane in Canada. It is one of the highest in the world. So essentially, with interest rates going a lot higher, that erodes their margins. And now you've also got the effect of people's home equity being erased, and the demand side is also going down. So basically, I could see like massive unemployment coming in the future because essentially these businesses, really put simply, have got too much debt. The fact is, the interest payments have gone up so much now that they're in trouble and they have to do something, and they're not going to be able to scale their business up and make more money because consumers don't want to pay it. We're seeing even in Canada, you just can't believe this, but people can't even afford food. Like a lot of people in the country can't afford food right now. And credit card debt is exploding as it is in the United States. And basically that is just people it's just they're on borrowed time. When you get onto the credit card and that starts to work its way up like it did in 2007, you're near the end, because that is when you know that these things are going to really start to hit the fan within 12, 18 months, if that.
Yes. So I always tell people, yeah, in your own life, if you take out this credit card, that conga line has to end. You can't keep taking on
Yeah.
credit and credit. But the government, the big problem I see in the United States is that the government has this debt payment too. It's not
Hmm.
it's not just private citizens because hey, your neighbor goes bankrupt. What does the government care? But
Yeah.
the government, in the United States, they solve problems of spending by more spending. Is that what you see in Canada as well?
Yes, yeah, the government has done that, especially the Trudeau Liberal government that got in 2015. Actually, Canada's debt was relatively stable and low before the Trudeau government got in. And they got in basically on a promise of deficit spending. So it was what the people want. And that kind of scares me a lot, to be honest, because it makes me think down the road what's going to happen. You know, there's a populist sort of movement that's forming right now around a leader that is more on the right side. He's more free market capitalism, and he'll probably get elected, but that election isn't going to be for another couple of years. And when I look into the future, I just think, well, even this guy, once he gets in, he's gonna it's going to be hard times. It's going to be rebuilding from the mess that has been created over the past, 7 years. So it really kind of scares me, because then I think, well, people don't really know about the stuff that we're talking about right now. So that scares me, because I'm like, well, after he's been elected and been in one term, I'm sure he'll just be out for the next person who is left, who's on the left side, and basically just wants to spend, spend, spend. The answer to everything will just be to spend more money. And it is scary, because you see what happened with the Bank of England. I mean, that was an eye-opener to a lot of people in the macro world anyway. Outside of the macro world, I mean, my girlfriend's parents were staying with us at the time. No idea what was going on. And I was trying to explain it to them. And I was really worried about it at that time. And it's kind of interesting to me how the currency is stabilized. It's actually gone up a little bit. I mean, it's benefiting off this bear market rally as well in everything, in the everything bubble. But yeah, it's kind of weird, because you think, what are the unintended consequences of what the Bank of England did there? And I think the real big thing that I can see happening in the future is that people lose faith in the central banks. And when that's happening, then we get the sovereign debt crisis. Then we get real major issues, because their credibility is just being destroyed right now.
Yeah, I think it happens in the financial space first. Just like in 2008, people would watch movies like The Big Short and not even understand what was even going on. They knew that home prices went down. They knew that people were losing their jobs. They didn't necessarily know why. And I try to tell people, if money is one side of every transaction, but there's somebody messing with the price of it, it's going to affect everything. And you cannot print, because a lot of people don't even understand what money is.
Mm,
And at the basic level, you cannot print productivity.
no.
And for some reason, people think the government can. They they think if I created it in my basement, then that's somehow illegal. But the government doing it, it somehow makes the world more productive. And unfortunately, as I've studied history and I study these cycles, I don't know if people will ever see it beforehand. I think they have to feel the pain.
Mm,
And hopefully it doesn't get so bad, like the government has so much control, because you can vote in communism, but you got to shoot your way out, as they say. So people have to feel that pain of socialism, of more government spending. And I've seen that problem here in the United States, because, we just had our midterms, and
mm-hmm.
we were talking about, a lot of politicians are now talking about Social Security, because it's such a massive, massive elephant in the room when it comes to spending. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they go up with inflation. But no politician will say, we have two options. We can either cut your benefits, or we can keep the same benefits you have, but it'll buy you half as much. So you'll get twice the amount of dollars, and it'll buy you half the amount of stuff. And really, what people want is purchasing power. They don't want the number on the screen. They want
Mm-hmm.
the purchasing power. So what is it that Canada, as far as social programs and spending, I know there's quite a few in Canada, but when you're looking at the federal budget in Canada, is there any wiggle room when you say, okay, I'm looking out into the future, because that's my thought in the United States. I'm looking out into the future. This is a math problem, and the math doesn't line up. But the political side is, it is political suicide to address spending,
Mm-hmm.
especially if it's a social program. So is that the same thing you see in Canada as well?
Yeah, it's pretty much exactly the same thing, to be honest. Exactly the same programs that suck up a lot of spending. They're just called different things. And I think Canada and the US has a massive problem with corruption that people don't talk about. And I think that is the main problem. If you look at the healthcare system in the United States, I have a lot of family in the United States, And the healthcare system there is so broken beyond belief. I mean, it's broken in Canada as well, but it is insanely broken. And who's it been broken by? Insurance companies just being able to charge whatever they want. And it's just, it's kind of insane because the insurance companies have driven the cost up of everything. And we see the same in our dental system here in Canada. And right now, instead of addressing the problem, because essentially the dental system in Canada is actually private. It's exactly like the system you have in the US for your healthcare. So basically right now they are trying to ram through this bill for dental care, which is going to essentially bring down the cost of dental care, but it's not. It's just more government spending that's going to go in there and drive the cost of everything up even more. And people just can't understand it. They think, yay, I'm getting free dental care. And they feel good about it for 6, 12 months. And then they don't notice that, hey, why is my dental care costs now going through the roof as well, even though they were subsidizing it at one point. And really, like, the costs for dental care in Canada are absolutely insane. They trump even the US. And again, that's because of insurance companies. A lot of people having insurance and the insurance companies then driving the cost of everything up beyond belief. I mean, if I go back to the UK where it's a private public system, and I think this is what's really needed. You need a private public system where essentially they can compete with each other. So the public system sets the bar real low for costs and keeps the private system from going way up. And that's what Mexico essentially has. They have their public system that is very, very cost effective. And if the private system got too expensive, everybody's just going to go to the public one. So the private system has to keep their costs down. But right now we just have, in the US, it's a purely private system. And in Canada, it's a purely public system, apart from our dental care. And essentially, they just don't work. We need like a free market where anybody can just go and start these businesses. And the regulation and the bureaucracy that's involved with becoming a dentist in Canada is absolutely insane. The cost is just massive. So that, of course, is baked into the price of everything. So all this red tape, all this regulation, it doesn't help things. It just makes things a lot worse. And in answer to your question, like it's pretty much the same things, but this dental care thing that they're trying to bring through, that's going to be a massive amount of government spending. And in fact, because right now in Canada, there's a coalition government. So essentially, the Liberal government in the last election did not get the full House. So they don't have the majority to pass these bills through. So they basically they got into a coalition with the far left, and they are the ones that want this dental. They're the ones pushing this dental. So essentially, I think it's so far left, the Liberals don't even want to do it. And it's so much spending, which is insane to believe. So I'm hoping that just kind of destroys their coalition and then we have to have a forced election. But even looking into, I don't believe politicians are going to come in and solve this problem. You know, we elect different people. They do exactly the same things, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's political. Like Social Security, people say it's suicide. It's
Yeah.
suicide, and ultimately, I think it'll be American suicide, like fiscal suicide, because it is such a because when you write a blank check, and I always try to preface this because unfortunately, finance and politics are intertwined now
Hmm.
because we don't live in a free market. And I ask people because they blame capitalism, a lot of people. I said, so capitalism is designed to give you better products for cheaper. Why is everything more expensive? If we live in a capitalist system, why are cars more expensive, homes, healthcare? And it's because the government sticks their thumb in it and gets regulation going. And in a free market, I want the way I compete for your business is I give it to you for cheaper. And unfortunately, you if you and I and you pulled a bunch of people in the room, do you want free everything? The answer is yes. So the question is, where is that line between why do we pay taxes if everything can be free and things actually cost money, as in productivity, units, currency? And if that currency isn't tied to productivity, it screws everything up. And the government does a very good job at it. And unfortunately, there's political incentive, and they get rewarded for these things. And um, that's why I think people need to feel the pain. They'll vote for the free thing, they'll get the free thing, and it won't be as free as they thought, unfortunately.
Yeah,
Or
totally.
the outlet will be the currency. Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah. And that's a topic entirely as well.
yeah. So is Canadian national debt, um, and so I'm looking at our debt payments here in the United States, and I'm thinking, okay, so that's the thing. If I was a politician, even if I was a heavy spender, I'd be like, okay, so we got this death spiral where our interest payments on our debt, we're getting towards the point where it's going to be the amount of the most powerful military in the world. So
Hmm.
military budget and interest alone on our debt are going to rival each other, then go and surpass it. Is that what you're seeing in Canada as well?
Yeah, I mean it's basically the same thing, and the sad thing I think is that they'll just in the end they're just going to print their way out of this. I like to think that we're going to head into a world that is higher interest rates, tighter money to kind of get things back to a better equilibrium. But I just don't see that. I just see them printing because that's what they've always done. It's what they only know how to do, and it's also what the public want because they have no clue what is really going on and how that's paid double in inflation.
So, but higher interest rates, even if that world existed, they would have to cut spending if right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Yes.
I think that would be a good thing because you'd essentially force them down the avenues that I was talking about where like for example healthcare. Well, if you can then say okay, we're going to allow the private sector to now do some of the healthcare services and we're going to take pull that funding away from that. We'll still have the public funding, then people who have the money can go to the private sector. That lessens the burden on the public sector healthcare system. And then it's also less spending for the government, hopefully, in that case, in an ideal world. Of course, we know world's not ideal with the government. But essentially, right now, you just have like a one-way ticket. And the healthcare system in Canada is totally just, I mean, it's all done province by province, so I can't really say for every single province, but most provinces, it's an absolute disaster. The wait times are absolutely insane. If I was seriously in a healthcare bind, I would go to Mexico. I would not stay and wait in Canada 24 months for an MRI or whatever it is. It's just absolutely nuts. So and that is bad service for the public as well. So there's a lot of people in Canada who can afford to go private. Well, not a lot. Actually, I should be clear, not a lot. But there are people in Canada who can afford to go private. There would be jobs also that would be created out of that. And again, you're lessening that burden on the public system and you're getting more towards a system where you have two entities competing with each other. But I mean, debt is so high right now in the government. I just do not see how they can get it down without the pain that you talk about. I think it's a fairy tale if we think that there's going to be no pain with that. And that's a real scary thought for me because, again, I just think the voter, they just want what feels good. And what feels good is more spending because they don't connect the dots. And it's really a problem. And that's part of the reason why I started the channel was to connect those dots and help people connect those dots. Because we live in this society now where nobody thinks for themselves. People are on TikTok and their brain is getting vaporized. Like attention spans now less than a goldfish. It's absolutely insane. It was not like that if you go back 20 years ago. And I think that's a major, major problem that we have to deal with now is the psychology of people is being destroyed. People are becoming much more it's their attention span, it's everything. Many psychologists and studies have been done on all of this sort of stuff, and I think that's a major problem, and I think that's part of the reason we saw the mania that we did last year, is that people just have no clue anymore, and they are just jumping from one thing to another, whatever feels great. I mean, the crypto is a great example of that. And right now, everybody's withdrawing from these platforms probably because they're struggling with inflation and struggling to pay the bills. And these were the people that didn't have the money to go gamble on crypto. And they were the ones who got sucked into it. So it's kind of, yeah, mad times.
It's their lotto ticket.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
they look at it. There's a lot of things that happen subconsciously, I think, that
Oh, yeah.
like George Gavin says, you have to go out the risk curve, subconsciously speaking, because there's no risk-free interest rate, really. And
Hmm.
so people subconsciously will go out on the risk curve. And what I find very fascinating, speaking of crypto, is and I did a video on this, who endorsed, because I'm a big fan of Bitcoin. I don't know about you, but I like Bitcoin. I think it's of a potential solution for the problems we see. Because, as you've eloquently stated, we have this issue. But I look at human beings, and you talk psychology. What are the incentives? And so, just a new politician in there isn't going to change the incentives. The incentives are to spend more money, to buy more
Hmm.
votes, and until the system itself is restrictive on the politicians, meaning they don't have the keys to the printer, I don't think they'll ever stop, because history tells us that this happens over and over and over again. You might get a very small relief in the brake pedal, one politician, but then the next politician is going to spend again, yada, yada, yada. So we have to get a brake pedal. But what I found so interesting in this FTX debacle is the people who are supposed to, so the police officer, the sheriff, who's sitting there next to the murderer, Sam Bankman Fried, and doesn't even just like, hey, there's blood on your shirt. you know, it's like the most smallest amount of investigation would have shown you that this guy's books are absolutely horrendous, which leads me to think, maybe there was, Occam's razor, maybe somebody was getting paid. Um, but I think that's why um, people invest in things like crypto, not Bitcoin, but like an FTX, is the mania. Um, they have to get money somewhere, and
Hmm.
their income keeps doing this, and inflation's raising a lot faster. But let me ask you. So speaking of crypto, CBDCs, you did a video today. I recommend people watch on social credit scores. That used to be a tinfoil hat thing to say.
Yeah, now it's in China.
Yeah, we may still be on the fringe, like people are like,
I think we are, yeah.
but there are people, and I try to explain this to people. If you talk to your normie friends, you guys don't understand that there are people out there that literally want to control your life, and that they're sociopaths. And you
Hmm.
don't think like that. You don't think you have this like desire for power and wanting to control people. Those people exist, and those people are in power around the world. But here's what I don't understand about CBDCs. A lot of people say, okay, they're going to roll them out because of inflation. I don't understand, unless there's a repricing, which kind of makes certain people richer than they already are, 1%. Unless there's a repricing, meaning, okay, your now digital dollars worth 10 of the old.
Hmm.
How does it fix inflation? How does it fix the fundamental problem, which is politicians have the keys to the printer?
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think CBDCs will fix anything. I think they'll make it about 20 times worse, actually, because then we're going to be in a society where banks can completely just print unlimited amounts of credit, and what society that will create, God knows. Probably like 2021 on steroids, which we know is going to be insane amounts of inflation. So I think CBDCs, I don't think they're any sort of answer. I think the rollout will come during some crisis. It might not be, I doubt it will be inflationary, to be honest. I think it will be more like they'll introduce them as some sort of stimulus payment. Like, hey, you're in this crisis. Like, think about what happened in 2020 when everybody was getting laid off. They wait until people are in a vulnerable position and then they pounce. This is psychology 101. When people are in a vulnerable position, you can control and manipulate them much easier. That is what hypnotherapists do. So it's kind of mad when you think about it, because they will essentially use that situation, and it might not even be obvious. It will just be like the Bank of Canada, for instance, saying we've got an app. This is where you go and get your payment. They might not even call it a CBDC at that point. And then essentially they will just link it all up in the background, probably without no public discussion at all about it. And all these things, I believe, they're probably already set up, good to go. I don't think the social credit score aspect will come later. I think as we've seen, they try and numb you slowly. And I think you can definitely look to Canada, because Canada is like in an extreme circumstance where it is completely corrupted by the World Economic Forum and the global elite. So you can kind of look at what's going on in Canada as a proxy for what might be coming to the US in future years. And we already saw social credit scores implemented last year. People have forgotten about that already. So essentially you had medicine passports. Depending on whether you made the right choice in the government's eyes for a medical decision, depended on whether you could get into that restaurant. That is social credit. It just wasn't called social credit. So I think that's how they do it. It's going to be a branding process, and it's going to be at a point of some type of crisis. And it might not be a medical crisis at that point. Who knows? I think one thing that could be used, and I hope it doesn't get used, because I hope this whole thing in Russia, Ukraine de-escalates. But if we were at war, social credit scores could become in them, because you need it for your security. We need to know and identify you. So you need to have this certain number attached. I mean, and I always go back to credit scores, your actual credit scores. Think about the credit scoring system that we have in the finance industry. It is terrible. It does not work at all. It is completely broken. And that scoring system, when it came in, people had they were pushing back against that. They didn't want that to happen. If you go back and look at the history of it, it's kind of insane. It was brought in as a temporary system, actually. And we know how temporary things are. But things like that, they come in after crises, because it's like, hey guys, we need this credit scoring system now, because we had that banking crisis. I mean, it was us guys who created that banking crisis, because we could have, just not lent you all that money. But hey, we want to control you a bit more. So we're coming in with this credit scoring. So we've seen it on the financial side. And that came in, and I just think now it will come in on the life side. And I hope it doesn't get to that. I really hope we don't get to that point. And I'm making decisions in my life to kind of get away from Canada, because I honestly, Canada, I love the country, but I can see where this is going, and I'm voting with my feet, which is leaving, going to Mexico. That might not be permanently, that will probably just be temporary, at least to start off with. But the thing is, I think that's what you have to do. I think there's, in my view, like, the best thing that I can do to protect myself right now is vote with my feet and leave, because I don't see this going good in any direction, depending on what politician you get. Things, we were shown, I believe, like, we were shown what it's going to be like in the future in 2021. And we know what that future looks like, and it was horrible for a lot of people. I mean, people were literally going insane with their money. We saw this mania. That's why I called the channel Market Mania. And living in that type of environment is just absolutely insane. But people struggle to realize that in places like Mexico, they just increased interest rates to 10%. People have very little debt in Mexico. Mexico produces a heck of a lot of stuff for the US and other countries. So it's a big, big producer. They make a lot of stuff there. And that's why I'm kind of looking at Mexico as a better place. And I think, the mainstream media scared a lot of people about Mexico for a reason. That, Tijuana, all these shootings, it's dangerous or whatever. But I've been there myself and I'm visiting all this winter, different areas of Mexico. And it's not that dangerous. It's I think that publicity is there for a reason to deter people.
Same thing in like Colombia. I think if you look at crime statistics in a lot of South American countries, they're way better than the United States, big cities. And so I'm like, yeah, Chicago is like one of the most dangerous cities in the world. But people have this connotation of like early 80s and 70s of what South America was like. I'm like, so it's definitely changed. But my base case for the CBDC, I think if society doesn't say stop, these politicians that are power hungry, yes, there'll be Mao. There will be, if there is no brake pedal for these people, more power. All they care about is just getting reelected, which is fine. I mean that's always been true. So it's
Yeah.
not unique to today. Just society used to put brake pedals on these people. And as George Gammon says, if the incentives align with these sociopaths, so they can get this office and do the things they want to do, gain more power, spend more money, yada yada yada, guess who is going to draw? But my big thing is, okay, so I'm thinking the normies. When I say normies, I mean just people not paying attention, going about the, which I will say, if you're one of those people, that's how life should be. You shouldn't have to be a part-time investor or macroeconomist to think through this stuff. But politicians doing their things behind the scenes, of course, make it so complicated because they're distorting the market. But what I'm saying is, when you have just a normal everyday person, they're thinking about pain points, and their pain point right now is inflation. And so if the government comes in and introduces a CBDC, I don't think it will stop inflation, even if this person doesn't care about a CBDC, but they 100% do care about their cost of living. So no matter
Hmm.
what the government does, gives more stimmy checks, let's say people vote for it, that's fine. But the economic reality is things will go up in price as
Hmm.
government becomes more involved. Supply goes down because competition goes down, and then more currency units chasing less stuff. So I don't think the pain point of your normal person will go away because of a central bank digital currency. So I just think it's just a step along the way of the ultimate currency collapse. And if you were to give somebody advice, right, I think Western countries' currencies, the, I'll put it to you this way: the system we have today, which is the dollar-backed fiat system, I think is going to fail in our lifetime. I think sooner rather than
Yeah.
later. It's hard to put a timeline on it, but if you look at the debt, you're like, mathematically, this can't keep going much longer. So when you're looking at that, what would you tell a person that would give them, or what gives you hope? What do you say, like, okay, then we can start a new system, and the new system should be based off of, what would you do, or what do you do?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer because there would be so much. I mean, yeah, that's a tough question to answer, really. But really, I don't even think about that much because I just think that the reality is when these currencies collapse, I mean, civil wars are kind of inevitable at that point. I don't think the US will be the first. I think they will probably be the last of the Western currencies, at least. But I think for countries like Canada, you could look at Turkey and what happened there. And that is probably going to be the reality in the future, unfortunately. And like the Turkey CPI, I think it got up to something like 30% at one point, which is absolutely insane. But people on the ground were saying things were going up by 90, 130%. And we all know the people on the ground are usually the ones that are right. The government statistics are completely broken, like all the ones that are produced in the US and in Canada are just a joke. So I think look at what's happening there. To build a system around that, you'd need sound money. I think we really need sound money, but the problem is there's constraints with sound money too, and I just can't see it in my head where we get to a point where people would actually beg for that, because people have just been numbed for so long. Like we've been going, what is it now, 30, 40, 50 years of these low interest rates now, where interest rates have just gone lower and lower. Like they go up and down, but every time they come down, it's to a lower baseline. So people take on more debt, and we built this debt-based economy. And even a lot of the people who have a lot of the money, even the big players who are really pulling the strings, they don't want other people to have money. Like they're almost socialists. Like if you look at some of the tech companies in Silicon Valley, like Mark Zuckerberg, and some of the systems like that guy would want implemented, it's just kind of insane. So I think it's difficult. I think, but personally, I would say building some sort of system around sound money would be the best thing to do. I just can't see a world in which people, well, I can't see any of the Western countries like Canada being a place. I think they will take the Turkey option, which is just hyperinflation essentially. And we're already seeing that. You know, just a couple of weeks ago, I did a video about literal hyperinflation in energy bills happening on the east coast of Canada. Nobody's talking about it. I covered it. It was only in the East Coast news, which barely anybody watches. And that was happening in real life in 2022, right now. And nobody talks about it. And the thing is, the media, just as in the US, controls the narrative so much. And really, when I gave up on Western countries, was essentially, and I'm not saying like, oh, I'm pro Russia or anything like that. I'm just saying I would want to be in more of a neutral base, which doesn't get involved. You know, Canada used to be neutral. Switzerland used to be neutral. But now these countries aren't neutral anymore. They get involved with everything. And, you know, I gave up in February when that trucker protest happened, because you really saw how the media, and I even did a video way back then, I said, this is probably going to be spun in some way that the truckers are evil people. And I was watching the videos live every day. There was loads of YouTube streamers down there covering it. And I was just thinking, right now they're trying to ram a bill through, Bill C11, which is basically going to allow the government to control platforms like YouTube and control what people see. So I'm just looking at what's coming ahead. And that bill has passed. Like, it's going to the Senate. Nobody wants it. It's not for the country's best interest. If people actually understood what it was, they might push back against it. But the reality is they just don't. So they get so controlled and manipulated by the media. I mean, one thing for certain, like on your phone, everybody has a news feed now. And literally, I've said this so many times, nobody even reads the news anymore. They just read the headlines. We've got to a point now in society where people don't even read past the headline. And that is scary to me, because I'm just like, well, what sort of society is that going to create in the future? And it's not a good one. And I'm looking down, because I'm looking down at the people like who are younger than me. And I'm thinking, my God, like, I don't have faith in these people. Like, this is the TikTok generation. This is the people who can't watch a 45-second video without switching off within 10 seconds. And that's not all of them. I have a friend who is 22 and he is insanely switched on. But, you know, that guy, I even said to him when I met him, I said, you're like one in a million, because most people just aren't interested. And, you know, I see in the UK as well, back in my home country, the movements against fossil fuels and energy. And the country is literally having an energy crisis. And they literally said, I think it was a couple of months ago, there were applications from BP to do drilling in the North Sea to get some oil, their own energy, and they denied them. The government just said, no, we're not doing it. And you can't make some of this stuff up. I think
And they have a windfall profits tax.
Yeah,
that
exactly. Exactly. So great encouragement for these energy companies to go out and produce more energy. We're just going to tax your profits even more. And I loved what I think it was the president of ExxonMobil said, because the Biden administration is debating doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And he said, we are giving back through our dividend to our investors. I just thought that is so true. Anybody can buy ExxonMobil stock, and I'm not recommending that you do, but anybody can. There's no restriction on who invests in that. Just because the majority of people that do are wealthy, because like normies, as you call them, they don't want to do the research, they don't want to do the homework. They don't want to do that. They would rather put their money in their bank account and watch it disappear over the course of 10, 20 years. So, yeah, just kind of mad. There's a lot there.
Yeah, it is angering. And I try to think, because it's easy to point out the issues because there are a ton of them. And a lot of people don't even see it. I'm thinking, oftentimes people, including me and you, we look at history in this microcosm of our existence. I'm 36. I look at it from the history of since I was born, right? But we go in these long ways of where that whole, hard men make good times and then good times make soft men kind of, and that's where I think we are. And I don't think when you say switched on, I don't think people need to be yet. And I think, unfortunately, pain, like economic reality, that's what I mean by pain. Like you cannot print prosperity, you cannot print energy, and one day when you flip the lights on and it doesn't work, and then you go to the person who's been helping you, and they say, "There's no more energy." That's when people start to go, "What? I thought you were. I thought," and then it's this diffusion of responsibility, and then people start to pay more attention because pain causes that. Unfortunately, I think that's what societies have to go through to wake up, because when you can basically do little to nothing and still eat, still have heat in these Western economies, it works. Everything works. But yeah, it's not going to be the case for very long with these kind of debts.
No.
Just a couple more questions here, and then I'll let you go. So you had a video on pensions, and I'm looking at the United States, and I haven't done a ton of research on pensions, but I do understand they have their bogey, right? They have their pot of money, and that pot of money has to make interest. And so I'm looking at these pensions, and I'm thinking, man, these states don't have a money printer, right? So they can't. I mean, they can ask the government for more money, which they might do. But at the end of the day, like in England, they had to go out the risk curve because the gilts weren't yielding that rate that they needed, so they levered up. All that to say, is that what you're seeing in Canada, especially with like the Ontario teachers' pension having to go out on the risk curve and invest in FTX?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of good data points where we can get the filings. So it's hard to see what their assets are even in. But even if you look at the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, that's one of the biggest pension plans in the world, or so they say anyway, so it must be true. But anyway, 200 billion assets under management or whatever they have, and it's something like 190,000 teachers. But the thing is, when you look at what they own, like it's right there on their website, they own a lot of real estate, particularly commercial real estate. Well, how well is that doing? They got into this FTX debacle, and there's really been no accountability since then. And I think really what I've tried to describe in the pension videos, and the reason why I did another one on Friday, was that people really, because And I'll tell you quickly why that sparked is I'd done like a short compressed version of the video I'd done the prior week, put it on TikTok. Because even though I hate TikTok, I don't go on there myself. I post stuff on there because I know there's a lot of younger people than me on there. And I'm just trying to get some stuff to them because they're not going to come and listen to the longer videos. And a lot of people commented on that, like, oh, it's only a certain percentage, like a small percentage of their assets or whatever. And I was thinking, well, hold on a second. Like, what does that say about their risk management? What does that say about other pension funds? You are talking about the largest pension fund. And if the largest pension fund is taking that amount of risk, what is the small pension fund doing that doesn't have a risk management team? And I'm not even sure how that FTX thing got through the risk management team. But I do see that as a major problem. Pension funds are essentially Ponzi schemes based on this everything bubble that we have. Like a lot of these pension funds in the US, they're invested in equities. Well, how well are equities doing right now? And the Fed is literally trying to jawbone the markets to bring them down. So what does that mean? Like, does that mean the stock market has to go up indefinitely? And what sort of unintended consequences will that create? You know, it's kind of insane because Trump used to always use the stock market as his kind of benchmark on how well he was doing. And I used to hate that so bad because it's not a benchmark of how well you're doing. It's a benchmark based on the speculation that's active out there.
So 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's kind of insane. I think pension funds is kind of the elephant in the room. And I think that there is so many problems that we're probably going to see come out next year, possibly with pension funds possibly needing bailouts. That's going to cause a major problem because how do those bailouts get facilitated? Is it going to be like they did in England with the Bank of England? Because if you think about the Bank of England, they only purchased, I think it was around £80 million worth of gilts, which in the grand scheme of things of their balance sheet is not that much. But what happens if it's like 100 billion, 200 billion in Canada? That would make a huge impact. That could send inflation up a lot, and it wouldn't happen slow. It would happen slowly, obviously, because it's a pension fund. But I think it's a huge problem again because we've created all these problems just based off low interest rates, just low interest rates pushing people further out on the risk curve. And I think what's scary to me is the fact that you look at the retail investor and a lot of people point the finger and go, you're stupid for investing in crypto or whatever, or all these altcoins. And then you have a pension fund who is doing the exact same thing. And it wasn't just the teacher's pension plan, it was BlackRock, which is also a pension fund. So, you know, and then you connect those two together because they're both members of the World Economic Forum. And Sam Bankman-Fried was active in the World Economic Forum as well. So you got to think about these things and kind of connect the dots because I don't think it's a coincidence that they were all involved in the World Economic Forum. I mean, we keep seeing these different things come out at the World Economic Forum, and then 6 months later, a politician is talking about them. I mean, the digital IDs and everything like that, they're happening in the banks right now in Canada. And it's just, you know, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, the pension funds, I think, are a huge issue going forward because that is people's retirement. And for me, I don't see any point investing in one of those because by the time I get to retirement, I just know this whole system will have flip-flopped, and whether I'm dead or alive or what happens at that point, who knows? But the thing is, I know this system, the probability of it being there for me when I retire is so fractional that I'm just not going to invest in it right now. And I think for people under 40, they really have no idea about that. They have no idea that the pension fund is acting like a Ponzi scheme or a pyramid scheme where everybody's going to get out, all these retirees are going to get out, And then as the bubble flips on itself, eventually the pension fund's going to need a bailout. And it's what unintended consequences does that bailout cause? A lot, probably.
Well, that's what I think. If people have a pension or Social Security, even though a lot of young people in the United States are like, man, I'm not going to get Social Security. But if people have a pension, they don't save for retirement because they think, there's my pension. And so it's double bad because you have this Ponzi scheme, as you mentioned. And on the other side, they're not saving because they're like, oh, I'm saving in my pension fund. That is literally money going into an incinerator to pay off the older people.
Yeah.
And the Social Security, during the elections and midterms, Obama was saying, well, that's your benefit. You work for that. And the Republicans want to cut it, which is whatever. You can say that. But why isn't it optional? I don't have the option to opt out of it. If it's for me, wouldn't that make sense? But
Yeah.
it's not for me. That's what people don't get. I'm not paying into it for me. I'm paying into it to pay off the system, which is as you mentioned, Ponzi scheme. And like I said, people don't care until it hurts their pocketbook. And ultimately, that's where I think it's going to go. Meaning pain will continue until morale improves. Beatings will continue until morale improves. And I think people will finally wake up and like, I keep chasing my tail with Canadian dollars, American dollars. And like you mentioned, Canada might go the route of Turkey. And I think the US will eventually do that as well. But if there's another option, like where does Turkey go when their currency hyperinflates? They go to the dollar. They go to the black market. And I think black markets will start to pop up and we'll see parallel economies where people, whether they like it or not, have to put their money somewhere other than the dollar.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll just say on your point there, real quick, is what because we both look at history, and if you look at the Mexico hyperinflation crisis, that is a reason why interest rates are 10% right now. Mexico knows that having hyperinflation is extremely painful. And Germany learned this as well a long time ago as well, but they seem to have forgotten about it now. And this is the thing, like with the fourth turning, if you read that book, things go in these 20-year cycles and people forget because people die. That's just the way it happens, cycle of life and everything like that. But I think it's really interesting to look at countries which have experienced hyperinflation and then what happens after. Do they manage to resolve it in a way? And I'd say that Mexico, they did manage to resolve it in a way. I mean, there was a decade or so of extreme pain. But if you look at how the economy's position right now, it's in a much better place than it was back then. And also people have a lot less debt and people are a lot happier too. And that is key. Because, debt is like a ball and chain. It's like a noose around people's neck. Little do they realize it. Really restricts their freedom, really restricts what risk they want to take. And that is a big problem. And I think, Mexico is a good place to look at what happened in the past there, of what we could potentially see if there was a Turkey crisis. But Turkey still, they're still got rates insanely low. And the problem is I just see that they manipulate the figures so that it seems like inflation's low, exactly like they've done this year. And if you look at the history of inflation reporting on Shadow Stats by John Williams, I love that website. There's 1980s, 1990s, and you can see that inflation is essentially following the same trajectory. It's just that it is a much lower rate. And if you look at what it is right now, like we haven't had deflation. We've actually been in a high inflation environment since 2015. So a lot of people would say, wow, didn't we nearly get deflation in 2020? Isn't that what all the central banks were concerned about? Well, no. So because they're lying to us all the time. They're constantly lying to us. So it's it's maddening in a way because you need to change these corrupt institutions, and how there's never been a time where that has happened without something like a civil war, unfortunately. And hopefully it doesn't come to that. But again, like you look at past history and there's no other way, it seems. which is unfortunate.
And they need it. I tell people they need to lie, because if like Jerome Powell came out and said, "Hey, this is going to be a real bad recession," yeah, or he didn't say inflation's transitory. Is like, oh, it's here to stay. The market's going to front run that, and so they always have to edit what they say in the most rose-colored glasses way, and that's why people are like, why are they so wrong? Sometimes they're intentionally trying to deceive you, but other times in the markets, they are trying to, half of it's psychological. So it's not
Hmm.
all math. And so they have to edit the psychology of people as much as they can. But even with psychology, because that's one part of the market that is really hard to predict, the part of the market that's not is the math. And
Yes.
and our national debt is so big. That's why I try to keep it simple for people, because okay, so what? Like, how does this affect me? I'm like, well, what are they going to have to do to pay that national debt and your Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and the military and yada 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 yada. Um, it's called printing, and so if inflation goes down, it could go down a little bit. It's going right back up, and it's going to continue to go up. And that you've lived in an inflationary world, it's just been lower. It's been less noticeable
Yes.
than it is today.
Yeah.
And because it's noticeable now, like month to month almost, that's why people are like, oh. And
I know, and people don't even question the central banks either with their 2%. Like, why do they have to have a 2% inflation target? Like, they keep talking about this. Nobody asked the question, hey, the Fed, why do you have to have 2% inflation? Why can't you just let the market work? And
mhm.
it's, yeah, it's,
Taxes.
yeah.
Like, I mean, the cynical answer is like, it, they would get less money in taxes, or the federal government would. And that's why I think, and you have to ask yourself, in a finite world, which we live in, how can you have GDP constantly growing? Forever. It has to grow forever. And if productivity grows, that's one thing. But it doesn't matter if GDP must grow, must grow, must grow. Your stock price has to go up. And you got to think to yourself, that is all a byproduct of this inflationary world where we're just pumping money in. And how come a company just can't say, we, like Apple, how much bigger can you get? If everyone in the world has an iPhone, what do you need? Two iPhones now? Um, you can't get much bigger. So then you pay a dividend, and that's fine. You don't have to keep growing. You just pay a
Hmm.
dividend. But I think at the base layer, to wrap this up in a bow, the base layer, the money, is distorted. And when it's distorted, it distorts literally everything else. Whether you agree with that or not, whether you care or not, it distorts everything else. And money, in some ways, is the glue that holds society together. It's what makes you and I have a peaceful transaction and not be bartering over, okay, I'll give you one chicken, give me a goat or whatnot. It allows for this commerce and free flow of even ideas, everything is based off this kind of glue that they distort. And somehow we think if they do that, it won't have drastic consequences. Like you said, they're always unintended, wink, wink. But um, methinks, with the World Economic Forum and such, they're becoming more uh, deliberate, shall we say.
Hmm.
Well, Luke, I want to be respectful of your time. I really appreciate you coming on the channel. I'm going to keep you around real quick after I end this recording to wrap it up. But thanks so much for joining me. And like I said, go check out Market Mania. He has a great channel on macro. Anything else to add before we end?
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. See you guys in the next one. Peace.